The plate hit the floor with a crash. All eyes turned. The manager stormed out from behind the counter, face red with rage. "You're useless," he barked in front of a full restaurant. The waiter lowered his gaze, offered no excuse, and silently began picking up the shards. No one came to help. No one dared speak up. But what no one saw was the fire behind his silence. Each insult, each humiliation, was fuel. He worked shifts that stretched into nights, saving every tip, learning, planning. While the manager mocked, he observed. While others served, he dreamed. And when he left the restaurant that night, it wasn't defeat he carried, it was resolve. A few days later, the same doors opened, but this time, he walked in not in an apron, but a tailored suit. No tray, no order pad, just a folder in hand. He walked up to the counter, placed the papers down, and calmly said, "As of today, this restaurant belongs to me." The air went still. The manager's smirk vanished. He didn't need to raise his voice. The document said it all. The same hands that once cleaned tables now signed paychecks. And the manager? Shown the door without a word. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't shout, it signs. And the waiter they once yelled at? He just bought their silence. Welcome to Heroes Unheard. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being a part of it. Benedetto's Italian restaurant occupied a prime corner location in Manhattan's Little Italy. Its red-checked tablecloths and vintage photographs creating an atmosphere of old-world charm that attracted both tourists seeking authentic experiences and locals who appreciated traditional Italian cuisine served in generous portions at reasonable prices. The restaurant had been family-owned for 43 years, built from nothing by Salvatore Benedetto, an immigrant who had arrived from Naples with empty pockets but unlimited determination to create something lasting in his adopted homeland. The dining room buzzed with the comfortable energy of a successful neighborhood establishment, where regular customers were greeted by name and first-time visitors were made to feel like honored guests in someone's home. The walls displayed decades of photographs showing the restaurant's evolution from a modest storefront to a beloved institution that had survived economic downturns, changing neighborhoods, and the challenges that destroyed many small businesses. Behind the scenes, the kitchen operated with the controlled chaos that characterized successful restaurants during peak service hours. Orders flew from servers to cooks, plates moved from preparation stations to warming areas. And the entire operation functioned with the precision that comes from experienced staff working together toward common goals of customer satisfaction and operational efficiency. But the heart of Benedetto's success wasn't just the food or the atmosphere, it was the family-like relationship between ownership and staff that had created loyalty and dedication extending far beyond typical employment arrangements. Salvatore had always treated his employees as extended family, understanding that exceptional service required genuine care for both customers and the people who served them. When Salvatore passed away 2 years earlier, his son Michael had inherited not just a profitable business but a responsibility to maintain the culture and values that had made Benedetto's more than just another restaurant. Unfortunately, Michael possessed neither his father's wisdom about people nor his instinctive understanding of what made the business successful. At 34, he approached restaurant management as a numbers-focused operation rather than a relationship-based community institution. Michael's background in corporate finance had taught him to analyze profit margins and operational efficiency, but he lacked appreciation for the intangible factors that had made Benedetto special. He viewed staff as replaceable resources rather than valuable partners, customers as revenue sources rather than community members, and the restaurant's reputation as something that could be maintained through cost-cutting rather than continued investment in quality and service. Under his management, the restaurant's culture had begun to deteriorate as experienced staff members left rather than tolerate his increasingly autocratic and disrespectful leadership style. The warm, family-like atmosphere was being replaced by corporate-style metrics and policies that focused on short-term profits rather than long-term relationships and community standing. Among the staff who remained was David Chin, a 28-year-old waiter who had been working at Benedetto's for 6 years, starting as a busboy while putting himself through business school at night. David had been drawn to the restaurant not just because he needed income, but because Salvatore's mentorship had provided practical education about customer service, business operations, and leadership that no classroom could match. Salvatore had recognized David's intelligence and work ethic, often spending quiet moments discussing business principles, customer psychology, and the challenges of running a successful restaurant in a competitive market. The old man had seen potential in David that extended far beyond carrying plates and taking orders, potential that he had encouraged through increased responsibilities and informal business education. David's colleagues respected him not just for his professionalism and reliability, but for his genuine care about customer satisfaction and restaurant success. He remembered regular customers' preferences, anticipated their needs, and provided the kind of personal service that created loyalty and positive word-of-mouth advertising. His sections always generated the highest tips and customer satisfaction scores, reflecting skills that went far beyond basic service competence. But Michael viewed David's popularity with customers and staff as a potential threat to his own authority rather than as an asset to be valued and nurtured. He resented the obvious respect that David commanded from longtime employees who remembered how things had been under Salvatore's leadership. And he suspected that David's business education made him critical of management decisions that prioritized short-term savings over long-term success. What Michael didn't know, what none of the restaurant's current staff understood, was that David's presence at Benedetto's represented far more than employment necessity or career ambition. Hidden in David's modest apartment was documentation of a business plan that had been developing for over 2 years, financial projections that had been refined through careful analysis, and investment commitments that would soon transform not just his own circumstances but the future of the restaurant that had become his second home. The confrontation that would change everything was building like a storm, driven by Michael's increasing frustration with staff he couldn't control and David's growing certainty that Benedetto's deserved better leadership than Michael was capable of providing. The collision between old values and new management, between profit-focused efficiency and relationship-based service, was about to reach a breaking point that would surprise everyone involved. The dinner rush was in full swing when the incident began, the restaurant packed with customers who had come to expect the seamless service and authentic atmosphere that had made Benedetto's a neighborhood institution. David moved between his tables with practiced efficiency, taking orders, delivering meals, and providing the kind of attentive service that justified the restaurant's reputation for excellence. At table 12, the Martinelli family was celebrating their daughter's graduation from law school, a multi-generational gathering that included elderly grandparents who had been coming to Benedetto's since Salvatore's early days. David had served them many times over the years, remembering their preferences and dietary restrictions, ensuring that their special evening would be memorable for all the right reasons. He balanced 4 plates of the restaurant's signature osso buco, moving carefully through the crowded dining room toward their table. The plates were heavy and hot, requiring the kind of balance and coordination that came from years of experience carrying multiple orders without assistance. David had performed this routine thousands of times, developing the muscle memory and spatial awareness that separated experienced servers from novices. But as he approached table 12, a customer at table 9 pushed back his chair without looking, creating an unexpected obstacle directly in David's path. David attempted to adjust his route, but the sudden change in direction caused him to bump against table 10, where the slight impact was enough to destabilize his careful balance. One of the plates slipped from his grip, crashing to the floor in a spectacular display of broken ceramic, scattered food, and splashed sauce that drew immediate attention from everyone in the restaurant. The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot, causing conversations to pause and heads to turn toward the source of the disruption. David immediately knelt to clean up the mess, his face flushed with embarrassment as he began gathering the larger pieces of broken plate while apologizing to nearby customers who had been startled by the crash. His priority was restoring normal service as quickly as possible, minimizing the disruption to other diners' experiences. "I'm so sorry," he said to the Martinelli family, his voice steady despite his obvious embarrassment. "I'll have your replacement entree out in just a few minutes. Please accept my apologies for the inconvenience." Mrs. Martinelli, who had been served by David many times over the years, smiled with understanding. "Accidents happen, David. Don't worry about it. We're not in any hurry tonight." But before David could respond, Michael Benedetto appeared at his side, his face red with fury and his voice loud enough to be heard throughout the restaurant. The public nature of his response suggested this was less about addressing an accident than about asserting authority and demonstrating his managerial control. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Michael shouted, his voice carrying clearly to every table in the restaurant. "That's the 3rd plate you've broken this month. Do you have any idea how much this carelessness is costing us?" David looked up from where he was kneeling among the scattered food and broken ceramic, his face reflecting not just embarrassment but genuine surprise at the public humiliation being directed at him. In 6 years of working at Benedetto's, he had never been subjected to such treatment, especially not in front of customers who were witnessing the entire confrontation. "Michael, it was an accident," David said quietly, hoping to defuse the situation without creating further disruption to the restaurant's atmosphere. The customer pushed his chair back unexpectedly, and I had to adjust my route. These things happen in busy restaurants. These things happen to careless, incompetent waiters, Michael replied, his voice growing louder rather than softer despite David's attempt to handle the situation professionally. "My father might have tolerated this kind of sloppy performance, but I won't. We're running a business here, not a charity for people who can't do their jobs properly." The comparison to his deceased father landed like a physical blow, both to David and to longtime customers who remembered Salvatore's kindness and understanding. The Martinelli family exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly upset by the harsh treatment being directed at someone who had served them with professionalism and courtesy for years. Other customers were beginning to look uncomfortable as well, their enjoyable dining experiences compromised by witnessing what appeared to be workplace bullying being conducted as public entertainment. Several people stopped eating, their attention focused on the confrontation rather than their meals. "Look, I understand you're upset about the broken plate," David said, his voice remaining calm despite the public humiliation he was enduring. "I'll pay for it out of my tips, and I'll be more careful going forward. Can we discuss this privately so we don't disturb the customers further?" "Don't tell me how to manage my restaurant," Michael snapped, his anger seeming to feed on David's reasonable responses rather than being calmed by them. "You work for me, not the other way around. When you screw up, I decide how to handle it, and I decide whether to handle it privately or publicly." He gestured toward the broken plate and scattered food that David was still trying to clean up. "This kind of carelessness affects our reputation, our costs, and our customer experience. Maybe some public accountability will help you remember to be more careful with our property." David finished gathering the debris and stood slowly, his dignity intact despite the extraordinary public dressing down he had just endured. Around the restaurant, customers were watching with expressions ranging from discomfort to outright disapproval of Michael's handling of what should have been a minor operational issue. "You know what?" Michael continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. "I think we need to reconsider whether you're really suited for this level of responsibility. Maybe you'd be better off working somewhere that doesn't require the kind of precision and professionalism we expect here." The threat was unmistakable. David's job was being questioned not because of his overall performance, which had been exemplary for 6 years, but because of a single accident that any experienced restaurant professional would understand as an unavoidable part of busy service. Mr. Martinelli, whose family had been loyal customers for decades, could no longer remain silent in the face of such unreasonable behavior. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone whose opinion carried weight in the community, "but David has provided excellent service to our family for years. He's professional, courteous, and clearly takes pride in his work. This accident could have happened to anyone." "Sir, I appreciate your feedback," Michael replied, his tone suggesting he appreciated nothing of the sort, "but how I manage my staff is not really your concern. We have standards to maintain, and consistent carelessness can't be tolerated regardless of customer opinions." The dismissive response to a longtime customer's defense of fair treatment created ripples of disapproval throughout the dining room. Other patrons began to murmur among themselves, their conversations reflecting growing discomfort with what they were witnessing and their displeasure with Michael's handling of both his employee and his customers. David looked around at faces that reflected sympathy, embarrassment, and disapproval of what they had just witnessed. These were people who had seen him provide excellent service for years, who understood that accidents happened in busy restaurants, and who were clearly uncomfortable with the public humiliation he had just endured. "I understand," David said quietly, his voice carrying a finality that suggested he had reached some kind of internal decision. "I'll finish my shift, and we can discuss my future here tomorrow when we both have time to think about what's best for everyone involved." Something in his tone suggested that tomorrow's conversation might not go the way Michael expected, but the manager was too caught up in his display of authority to recognize the subtle shift in dynamics that had just occurred. 3 days later, David returned to Benedetto's, but not through the staff entrance and not wearing the black pants and white shirt that marked him as a member of the service team. Instead, he walked through the front door wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that spoke of wealth and success, carrying a leather briefcase that suggested business far more significant than employment applications or personnel discussions. The lunch crowd was sparse, allowing the few customers present to notice the well-dressed man who moved through the restaurant with the confidence of someone who belonged there but clearly wasn't there to dine. He walked directly to the host station where Michael was reviewing inventory reports, his presence commanding attention in ways that his waiter's uniform never had. "Michael," David said, his voice carrying a new authority that made the manager look up with surprise and growing confusion. "We need to talk. Privately." Michael's initial reaction was irritation at being interrupted by someone he had publicly humiliated just days earlier. Someone whose employment had been essentially terminated through hostile management tactics designed to force resignation rather than require formal firing procedures. "David, if you're here to apologize and ask for your job back, you should have called first," Michael said, his tone suggesting that such a conversation would be pointless anyway. "I've already started interviewing replacements, and I think we're both better off moving in different directions." "I'm not here about employment," David replied, his voice calm but carrying undertones that suggested Michael had fundamentally misunderstood the purpose of this visit. "I'm here about ownership." The word hung in the air like a challenge, its implications not immediately clear to Michael but carrying weight that suggested this conversation was going to be far different from what he had expected. David opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder containing documents that bore the official seals and legal formatting that characterized significant business transactions. He placed the folder on the host station counter with the careful precision of someone who understood the power of proper presentation. "What is this?" Michael asked, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence as he recognized legal documentation that appeared to be far more complex and significant than anything he had been expecting. "Purchase agreement," David said simply, his voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who had reached the conclusion of a long-planned strategy. Benedetto's Italian restaurant, including all assets, inventory, customer lists, and intellectual property rights. Effective immediately upon execution. Michael opened the folder with hands that had begun to tremble, his eyes scanning legal language that was clearly authentic and professionally prepared. The documents were extensive and detailed, reflecting the kind of sophisticated legal work that characterized major business acquisitions rather than casual inquiries about purchasing struggling restaurants. "This is impossible," Michael said, his voice weak with disbelief as he processed the magnitude of what he was seeing. "The restaurant isn't for sale. We're profitable, we have regular customers, we've been in my family for over 40 years. "Actually, it has been for sale," David replied, his voice remaining calm despite the obvious distress his revelation was causing. "You've been working with restaurant brokers for 8 months, trying to find buyers who would pay enough to cover your debts and provide sufficient capital for you to pursue other opportunities." The accuracy of this information hit Michael like a physical blow, forcing him to confront the reality that David somehow knew about confidential business negotiations that had been conducted through intermediaries and non-disclosure agreements. "How could you possibly know about that?" Michael asked, his voice reflecting growing alarm at the sophistication of David's knowledge about private business matters. "Because I've been one of the potential buyers your broker has been negotiating with," David explained, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone revealing a carefully planned strategy. "Chin Holdings LLC has been conducting due diligence on Benedetto's for the past 6 months, analyzing financial records, customer demographics, operational efficiency, and growth potential." The revelation that David had been evaluating the restaurant as a potential acquisition target while working as a waiter transformed Michael's understanding of everything that had transpired over the past several months. Every shift David had worked, every customer interaction he had observed, every operational detail he had witnessed, all of it had been professional reconnaissance conducted by someone with the resources and sophistication to purchase the entire business. "The irony," David continued, "is that your management style over the past 2 years has actually made the acquisition much more affordable than it would have been under your father's leadership. Declining customer satisfaction, increased staff turnover, and reduced operational efficiency have depressed the business valuation considerably." Michael felt his world tilting as he realized that his attempts to assert authority and control costs had actually undermined the value of the asset he was trying to sell, making it possible for someone he had considered a subordinate to purchase the family business at a price that reflected its deteriorated condition rather than its historical success. "But how could you possibly afford?" Michael began, his voice trailing off as he confronted the reality that his assumptions about David's financial circumstances had been completely wrong. "Stanford MBA, class of 2018, David said, providing context that explained his business acumen and strategic thinking. I've been working in restaurant acquisitions and management consulting for the past 4 years, building capital and expertise specifically for opportunities like this one. He gestured around the restaurant that had been his workplace for 6 years. Benedetto's has incredible potential that's been constrained by management that doesn't understand what made it successful originally. Your father built something special here, but you've been systematically destroying the culture and relationships that created its value. The assessment was delivered without malice, but with the clinical precision of someone who had been analyzing the business with professional objectivity rather than emotional attachment. The purchase price reflects current market conditions and operational performance, David continued, but it also includes provisions for retaining existing staff, restoring original menu offerings that you've eliminated for cost savings, and rebuilding the community relationships that your management approach has damaged. Michael scanned the financial terms with growing amazement, recognizing that the offer was not only legitimate but generous given the restaurant's current condition and his own financial pressures. The documentation included proof of financing, timeline for closure, and transition plans that had been developed with sophisticated business expertise. There's one additional provision, David said, his voice taking on an edge that reflected personal satisfaction with the justice of the situation he was creating. Your employment will be terminated immediately upon completion of the purchase transaction. Consider it professional accountability for public humiliation and workplace harassment. The reversal of power dynamics was complete and absolute. The man who had publicly berated David for dropping a plate was about to lose ownership of his family's restaurant to someone he had considered beneath his notice, someone whose intelligence and capabilities he had completely failed to recognize or respect. The transition of ownership proceeded with remarkable efficiency, reflecting the months of preparation that David had invested in understanding every aspect of Benedetto's operations, financial structure, and legal obligations. Within 2 weeks, all documentation had been completed, financing arrangements finalized, and operational control transferred to Chin Holdings LLC. With David assuming the role of owner-operator that he had been preparing for throughout his years of working in the restaurant, Michael's departure was swift and final. His attempts to negotiate alternative arrangements rejected by legal counsel who pointed out that his treatment of staff and customers had created liability issues that made his continued involvement inadvisable. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that his authoritarian management style, designed to assert control, had ultimately cost him control of everything his family had built. David's first act as owner was to call a meeting with all restaurant staff, many of whom had witnessed the public confrontation that had precipitated the ownership change. The meeting was held in the main dining room after hours, with employees gathering around tables where they had served customers for years under very different management philosophies. "I want to begin by apologizing for what you've had to endure over the past 2 years," David said, addressing colleagues who had become friends during his time as a fellow employee. This restaurant was built on principles of respect, dignity, and family-like relationships. Under Michael's management, those values were abandoned in favor of cost-cutting and authoritarian control. The staff listened with expressions ranging from amazement to satisfaction, many of them still processing the dramatic reversal that had transformed their colleague into their employer while maintaining the personal relationships that had sustained them through difficult times. Going forward, we're returning to the principles that made Benedetto special under Salvatore's leadership, David continued. Exceptional customer service, authentic cuisine, fair treatment of staff, and genuine commitment to being a positive presence in our community. He outlined specific changes that would be implemented immediately: restoration of menu items that had been eliminated for cost reasons, increased staffing levels to ensure proper service, profit-sharing arrangements that would make all employees partners in the restaurant's success, and policies that ensured respectful treatment of staff regardless of their position in the organizational hierarchy. Most importantly, David said, we're going to rebuild the culture that made people want to work here and customers want to return. This restaurant succeeds when everyone feels valued and respected, when we treat each other like family, and when we never forget that our success depends on taking care of each other and our customers. The response was immediate and enthusiastic, with longtime employees expressing relief that the values they remembered from Salvatore's era would be restored and newer staff members excited about working in an environment that prioritized dignity and mutual respect over arbitrary authority and cost minimization. Within months, the transformation was remarkable and measurable. Customer satisfaction scores increased dramatically as service levels improved and the warm, welcoming atmosphere was restored. Online reviews reflected customers' appreciation for the return to authentic Italian hospitality and cuisine quality that had made Benedetto's a neighborhood institution. Staff turnover, which had reached crisis levels under Michael's management, dropped to nearly zero as employees rediscovered job satisfaction and professional pride in their work. The profit-sharing arrangement created financial incentives for exceptional performance, while the respectful treatment made people want to contribute to collective success. Most significantly, longtime customers who had stopped coming during Michael's tenure began returning as word spread that Benedetto's had recaptured the spirit and quality that had made it special. The Martinelli family, who had witnessed David's public humiliation, became some of his most vocal supporters, telling friends and neighbors about the positive changes under new ownership. David implemented innovative programs that honored Salvatore's legacy while adapting to contemporary business realities. A scholarship fund provided educational opportunities for staff members pursuing career advancement. Community partnerships supported local charities and neighborhood development initiatives. Menu additions reflected customer feedback while maintaining authentic Italian traditions. The restaurant industry took notice of Benedetto's transformation, with trade publications featuring articles about David's approach to acquisition and management. Business schools used the case study to illustrate principles of organizational culture, employee relations, and the relationship between leadership style and business performance. But for David, the most satisfying aspect of ownership wasn't the financial success or industry recognition. It was the daily experience of working in an environment where people were treated with dignity and respect, where mistakes were learning opportunities rather than occasions for public humiliation, and where success was measured by collective achievement rather than individual authority. The broken plate that had triggered the confrontation with Michael was never replaced, instead becoming a symbol of the moment when hidden potential was revealed and justice was served through preparation meeting opportunity. David kept a fragment of it in his office as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that talent exists at every level of organizations, and that how we treat people when we think they can't affect our lives often determines how they treat us when circumstances change. Michael's attempts to find similar employment in restaurant management were consistently unsuccessful as word spread throughout the industry about his treatment of staff and customers. His reputation for hostile management and poor judgment made him unemployable in a business where success depends on relationships, teamwork, and customer satisfaction. Years later, when restaurant management students studied the Benedetto's case, they focused not just on the dramatic ownership reversal but on the underlying principles that determine success or failure in service industries. The story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of treating employees as disposable resources rather than valuable contributors to organizational success. David's approach to leadership became a model for other restaurant owners seeking to build sustainable businesses based on mutual respect and shared success. His speaking engagements at industry conferences always included the story of the broken plate and the importance of treating every team member with dignity regardless of their position or apparent prospects. The restaurant's success continued to grow as David expanded to additional locations, each one operated according to the same principles of respect, quality, and community engagement that had restored Benedetto's original reputation. But he never forgot the lessons learned during his years as a waiter, when careful observation and patient preparation had positioned him to seize an opportunity that others couldn't imagine. The transformation of Benedetto's became a neighborhood legend, told and retold as an example of justice served and talent recognized. Customers took pride in dining at a restaurant where the owner had earned respect through character and competence rather than inheriting authority through family connections or financial advantages. Most importantly, the story inspired other employees in service industries to pursue their own professional development and career aspirations. Understanding that current circumstances don't determine future possibilities and that preparation combined with perseverance can create opportunities that seem impossible until they become inevitable. This story was brought to you by Heroes Unheard. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Tell us in the comments what they meant to you and how you remember them. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.